and the third part of the Nevada Constitution. And what we want to talk about is a couple topics, and the first of those being eminent domain. Eminent domain means the government comes and takes your property, your land, your house, whatever, for some supposedly public use. They're going to come take your stuff. You have a house, you're living there, you're perfectly fine, and they want to build a road, and they come and take your house. So we're going to talk about a couple examples. One has to do with the Barclays Center, where the New Jersey Nets play and a hockey team plays. A real estate developer got the city to force out people who'd been living there a long time, rip their houses down, issue $600 million in tax-exempt bonds, and give the land to the developer. Yeah. So you lived there. You've been living there for your whole life. You've been paying your taxes, doing your thing, and the government just comes and takes your house to let some rich guy get richer. Okay? The U.S. Constitution has the takings clause, the Fifth Amendment, right? Remember, the Fifth Amendment says, the very last line, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. It doesn't say they have to have a good reason. It doesn't say they have to be not making people rich. It just says they have to give you just compensation. So this is a big deal. So this is supposed to happen at houses looking like the one on the left. The city, for example, Detroit, they had lots of areas of Detroit where run down, the inner city. The city bought them, ripped stuff down, got people to come in and redevelop and make it better and better and better and better, and they're working to make it better, and that's what you do. Okay? The question is, when you have nice old houses that people are living in, working in them, and they're fine, do you then let them, does the government help the private developer come in and knock those down and put up a shopping center? That's the question. So 2 examples here, and you've got readings on these. The Kelo case went to the U.S. Supreme Court. A little old lady, again, in Oregon, was forced to sell her house because the city had figured out that they could get rid of these homeowners who'd been living there for a long time, nice old houses, they were fine people, paying their taxes, but the city figured out that they could take that land away from these people, sell it to, or give it to a private developer, and their tax revenue would go way up. And the U.S. Supreme Court said 5-4, with the liberals on the 5 and the conservatives on the 4, that this was not a violation of the Constitution, that the Constitution merely says that it's got to be for a public use, and collecting more tax revenue constitutes a public use. Provided, they said, provided that there's a plan and they're following their plan. In New York, it was this developer named Ratner who built the Barclays Center. He was a part owner of the Nets at the time. And the New York Supreme Court basically said that this outcome was most likely the product of a rigged system where political appointees are relying on studies paid by developers, and it's a whole mess. And then they proved it anyhow and said it was fine. Okay? These 2 cases started a firestorm of changes that more than 30 states amended their constitutions to stop this stuff. So here in Las Vegas, we've had a whole bunch of scandals surrounding the airport. The airport did a whole bunch of land deals trying to allegedly clean out land that was under the noise umbrella of the airport, but it turned out that they made a lot of sweetheart deals with people whose fathers had been on the county commission and stuff. There was a lot of scandalous stuff going on. Our governor, Steve Sisolak, actually won a lawsuit against the airport because they made a deal with the property owner next to him who was a friend of somebody, and they didn't make the same deal with him, and he won millions of dollars in court because they were playing favorites and playing friends. We have a whole bunch of scandals in town about golf course developers where somebody gets a really great deal to build this golf course, and then after a couple of years they say, hey, the golf course isn't making any money. Can I just build apartments on here? And they kind of go, sure. And the guy ends up making millions and millions and millions of dollars at taxpayer expense. And again, you get this idea that it's a friend versus a friend thing. Some of this has happened in downtown redevelopment where, favorite sons where certain people have gotten better deals as the city helps developers buy land or get land to redevelop downtown. This is a big problem of how do you keep these things fair and how do you show that they're actually public use, that it's good for society, and how do you prove that what's going on isn't somebody underhandedly taking care of a friend of theirs and using eminent domain to do that. So what happened in Nevada was we changed the Constitution. And now the Constitution says public use shall not include the direct or indirect transfer of any interest in property taken in an eminent domain proceeding from one private party to another. You cannot take my land and give it to a private developer. You can't say, hey, this guy wants to put a shopping center where my house is. You cannot take my house through eminent domain and give it to the guy to build something. Okay? In all eminent domain actions, the government shall have the burden to prove public use. And now the government has to prove that what they're doing is public use. So if they want to take your land, you take them to court, they have to prove that what they're doing is a public use. And land has to be valued at highest and best use. So if we're selling this golf course, we steal all this stuff, we build this golf course, and the guy wants to turn it into apartments, or we see that it's apartments, the value of that land originally has to be the highest use. So if the land is worth $20 million with apartments on it and $5 million with a golf course on it, and they're going to take your land to do this, they have to pay you on the $20 million, not the $5 million. Highest and best use. This goes back to Henry George. Right? We should tax land at its highest and best use. So the Constitution of Nevada now says if there's two things we could do with this land and one has way more value than the other, we have to pay you not at the low. We can't say, hey, we're going to do this cheap thing on this land and we're only going to pay you for that, and then 2 years later turn around and do the more expensive thing on the land. We have to pay you for what the real value, the highest and best use of that land is. All right, so briefly talk about education in Nevada. The Constitution says the legislature is to encourage education. We have a unique funding system in Nevada that very few states have. Schools are funded by property taxes, which means in most states, each county funds the schools in that county, or each city funds the schools in that city based on the property tax, which means you have very uneven. In Texas, there are school districts that have 10 times the budget per student of other school districts. It's very uneven. Nevada does not have that problem. We take all the property tax money, we pool it, split it back up, and give it back to the schools. So essentially, every student in Nevada gets almost, they play with it a little because they're legislators and they want to take care of their people and their stuff. But it's relatively even compared to most states in the United States. The funding per student, per pupil in Nevada K-12 is relatively even compared to what we get in most states. Now, the other unique thing about Nevada is we have a Board of Regents, which is a constitutional entity, which means it's not really controlled by the legislature. They control it indirectly because the legislature has the money and the regents don't have any power to tax. But they're an independent agency. They're elected, and they have all the higher education institutions in the state. There is no other state in the United States that has a single Board of Regents that's elected. None. There are advantages and disadvantages in our system. We had a cab driver on the Board of Regents for a while who'd never been to school, and yet he's running higher education in Nevada. It has advantages. It means it's easier here to transfer from the community college to the university than it is in most states, because both the university and the community colleges are under one jurisdiction. In most states, the community colleges are funded by counties, and they're funded separately from the universities and funded differently from the universities. And we have this problem in Nevada with funding. There is a constitutional amendment coming through the legislature, which will probably pass the legislature and probably pass the citizens, because the Board of Regents, sometimes we have really good Board of Regents and sometimes we have really horrible people on the regents, and it kind of alternates back and forth, and I won't go through that history, but the idea here is to go away from an elected Board of Regents, or have a hybrid board where some of them are elected and some of them are appointed by the governor. And there'll be an election 2020 that fall, and if that gets approved, then the Board of Regents will be taken out of the Constitution and will essentially go away. Then there'll be a new Board of Regents appointed in 2021 when the legislature meets again. And for that year, the governor and the superintendent of schools are going to run higher ed, which is a bad thing, but that would only last for a year. We have lots of funding problems in higher education, and here's just an example. You wonder why your tuition and fees keep going up so much. In 2009, the state legislature gave UNLV $190 million to run its operations. 10 years later, 2,000, in fact almost 3,000 more students than we had then, we got $172 million. We were actually at $140 million in 2013. So we went from 190 down to 140 and only back up to 172. And the state legislature has filled in all those tens of millions of dollars by raising your student fees. For more than 30 years, the legislature gave the Nevada system of higher education, the NCHE, 19.3% of the state budget. We fell down to 12% of the state budget, and currently we're back to 16% of the state budget, but we're still way down in terms of state funding, and it's forced your student fees way up. UNR also gets more money than UNLV, which pisses us off. We have more students, they get more money, but that's the whole north-south thing and the way our lovely Board of Regents works. And the legislature. It's not all the Board of Regents' fault. So some other things that are in the Constitution. Some other things that are in the Constitution. The Constitution currently says the minimum wage in Nevada is $6.15 per hour. Remember that there's a federal minimum wage, but it doesn't apply to certain workers who only work in the state. The legislature is considering a bill which would raise the minimum wage over time to $14, and that would go in front of the voters again in 2020 because they want to put it in the Constitution. It's probably not where it belongs. They probably ought to get that whole minimum wage out of the Constitution, but $14 is still better than $6.15. The Constitution of Nevada says that hospitals must treat patients regardless of their insurance status. So if you don't have health insurance and you go to the emergency room, the hospital must treat you, but the state will reimburse them. So the state of Nevada spends hundreds of millions of dollars every year reimbursing hospitals for treating people who don't have health insurance. And again, if you try to figure out and try to solve health insurance problems in the United States, understand that there's all this money being spent on healthcare by states, right? States are spending money on indigent care. They're paying through the emergency rooms. And if you took all that money and you put it into universal healthcare system, hey, there's some years $500 million being spent in Nevada by state government and cities and counties on healthcare for people. Well, that's a good start to having a universal healthcare system. So there's lots of money out there that's being spent on healthcare, but there's no way for anybody to scoop all that money up and turn it into a healthcare system. The state could do it, right? Like Romney did in Massachusetts. You could have a state healthcare system, but it's not likely to happen in Nevada. Anyway, between 1864 and 1937, the state constitution of Nevada said, the respective counties of the state shall provide as may be prescribed by law for those inhabitants who, by reasons of age and infirmity or misfortunes, may have claim upon the sympathy and aid of society. So up until the middle of the Great Depression, the Nevada Constitution said people who are old or infirm or have had misfortunes should get help from their county. Their county should help them. And during the Great Depression, we took that out of the Nevada Constitution. Separation of church and state. The Nevada Constitution says no sectarian instruction shall be imparted or tolerated in any school or university that may be established under this Constitution. We cannot, under the Constitution, require you to take a course in Bible study at the university. And they can't do it at schools, public schools. Then it says, no public funds of any kind or character whatever, state, county, or municipal, shall be used for sectarian purposes. So the city can't pay for a Christmas display using public funds. There's a controversy going on in Nevada because the legislature had tried to come up with a system where if a student left the public schools and went to private schools, the state would still continue to pay for their education, even if they went to a church school. And it would appear that the Constitution prevents that, and they've been to court, and the courts have said the Constitution prevents that, but the state continues to look for a way around this requirement that says that the state can't give money to a sectarian purpose. And here we are. We have reached the end.